we were a little skeptical if we could get out of high school. So I went to the principal of the high school and I said, if I join the service, are you sure I can get my diploma? And I always use this phrase, you know, if it wouldn't have been for the war, I'd probably still end up in high school. But he assured us that we would get our diploma if we went into service. So at 18, well, away we went. We went to Bainbridge, Maryland, which was a boot camp. And the buildings were up, but none of the roads were in. And this was a guy that had his bed turned down every night before he went to bed. Yeah, my bed, clean sheets, bed, and whatever. So you went to service was a little bit different. But we get in there and we had to sleep in hammocks, which we never slept in our life. They didn't have beds at that time. You had to sleep in your sea bag. So we spent 6 weeks with all kinds of drills and everything was pertaining to the war. So after 6 weeks, they decided what they were going to do with me. Well, when I joined the service, and this is hard to believe, they gave you 3 choices of what you wanted to do when you're in the service. And being 18, I said I wanted to be a diamond cutter, a parachute rigger, and what else was there? There was something else to pick. 3 things. Well, I didn't get any 3 things. I didn't get any of that. Instead, they put me in an outfit called Research and Development. Now, this Research and Development, we got everything that the Navy would buy for the war, we tested out. And there was only 11 of us in Research and Development in Little Creek, Virginia. There was 12 officers up in Ocean View and just 11 of us sailors in the other place. So anything they'd get, they'd bring down to us and we would test it out. We trained on LCVPs in Little Creek, Virginia, but never knowing that these were the things that took soldiers into the beaches. Practicing in Little Creek, Virginia on the LCVPs. We were going out to jetty one day and this kid from Allentown, him and I were up in the bow of a boat and the waves were about 15 feet high. Well, we hit a wave, the boat went up, and we stayed up there. All of a sudden we come down and we were both knocked out completely. I got awake and I was covered full of blood. I didn't know. He bit his tongue off and he was laying on top of me and bleeding like a pig. They got his tongue and they sewed his tongue back on. But that's where I got hurt in my knees too in that one. I ended up in the hospital there. We went to Georgia to teach the soldiers how to shoot rockets off LCVPs. When we did that for 6 weeks, we wanted to come home. Well, we went up to the base and told them we had to have money to get back to Little Creek, Virginia. And they said, I'm sorry, you have no voucher for it, so we can't give you any money. So there we were, all stuck in Georgia with no way of getting home. So we met an old-time Navy chief. And he said, I'll give you guys the money to get home. So he took it out of his pocket and gave us some money. We got back to Little Creek, Virginia. And they still wouldn't give us the money because we didn't have any voucher for it. So we all chipped in and sent the goddamn money back. So that was something. Let me tell you that you can be shanghaied out of the Navy. We had a first-class petty officer, which would take all the officers' cars and he'd change the oil, change tires, and this, which is very, very illegal because they lived in one base and he was taking all the equipment out of Virginia. So one day I got in a fight with him naturally. And I told them, I said, if you do one more thing, I'm going to the captain of the base and tell him what you're doing for them asses up there in the Thai Tower. Well, the next morning at 8:30, I hear my name on the PA system, and they said report to personnel, which I did. I went up to personnel and they said, get your sea bag packed and be up here in 2 hours. So I went back, packed my sea bag up there 2 hours. They said, here is your papers. We're taking you to the Cape Charles ferry. You go across Cape Charles, get on a train, report to Pier 50 in New York, which I did. When I got up to New York, I called my mother and dad and said, I think I'm going overseas. The best thing you can say is, don't fight people. When the war started, they had to get everybody out of jail to put them in the amphibious force, which I ended up in. And there's another time that was a nightmare when they got all these guys out of jail with their shaved head and what have you. Here I am, 18 years old, with all these guys that were ex-convicts and what have you, and they all were in the amphibious force because it was more or less a suicide squad like there is today in Special Forces, which is the sea, what are they called? Navy SEALs. That's what it would have been today, the Navy SEALs. So when they figured they were going to have these nuts going in on LCVPs in the invasion, they wanted to save some good lives, so they took everybody out of the jails in the Navy, and they took them to Little Creek, Virginia. That's where this was originated, the amphibious force. And they used to have, in the middle of this place, they put up a picket fence. And you heard about people getting kicked out of the Navy. That's really true. Every day at 4 o'clock, if these guys got court-martialed, they gave them a suit that was 2 sizes too small for them. And they were lining everybody up going out to the gate. And as they were discharged, these guys gone out the gate, everybody kicked them in the ass till they got them out of the gate. So when I went to New York and got on the LST, we were attached to, there was attached 4 LCVPs, which were landing craft. It carried 36 people, or 2 jeeps. And we were not attached to the crew of the LST. We were just on there as passengers. And we left, we didn't know where we were going. Next stop was Nova Scotia. And here we waited and waited because we were picking up a convoy. And we didn't know what we were picking up, we were just sitting there. So after about 3 weeks in Nova Scotia, which the temperature was probably 20 below zero all the time, they decided to move out. So we moved and we started across the Atlantic. And if you ever think you were going to die, to be in the middle of the Atlantic at 18 years old, and you never saw daylight sometimes for a week or a week and a half because the water would come right over the ships. The waves would be 30, 35 feet high in front of you and in back of you. So we went backwards more than we went forwards, because an LST only drew about 8 feet of water. So it was just like being in a bathtub. And we had 250 soldiers on it, which I'd say none of them got out of their bunks. So we got in a convoy and we worked for 4 hours on and 4 hours off. And we had to sit in the bow of that LST for 4 hours, and you had ice over you, completely covered in ice. And at that time, we were pretty good smokers, and you were never allowed to smoke. But we found a way to smoke up there anyhow. The reason we were up there, we were looking for submarines. I never saw one, really. I didn't want to see one either. And we had many calls. We got so damn tired that when they'd send a general alarm on submarines were in the vicinity, instead of going topside like we were supposed to go, we used to dog the hatches down, which means if you were hit, you were in there to stay. But we just pulled the bunks up over our heads, pray for the best. It didn't bother. We was 18 years old. And we used to hear these old guys, which were 30 or 35 years old, and had families, you know, they were all crying. And so, what are you crying about, you know? And, of course, they were worried about their families. We didn't care. 18 years old, we didn't care. Going across, one of the LSTs split in the middle, and they had to weld it. That held us up for a while. Halfway across, one of the guys got sick, and we had to get him to one of the main ships. Well, that was a job. LSTs were put on a davit that raised you up and down to get it in the water. Well, when you're in 15-foot and 20-foot waves, and the davits come down, and you may be hanging because the waves are down below you, and if you let go, you'll never get back on the ship again because you can't hook up to the davit. Anyway, we got the guy across to the other ship in 20-foot waves. Trying to eat was the biggest thing, because when you were going up and down and around, and you'd go up to the galley one side, and when you were going down, you were actually going up because the waves would throw that high. So there wasn't much eating. You ate a lot of crackers, ate a lot of raw potatoes. The soldiers, they were so sick. So it took us 29 days to get across. And we ended up in Dublin, Ireland, before the invasion. When you were in London, there were no lights whatsoever. And you walk along the street, and all of a sudden you heard a buzz. And at this time it was called a buzz bomb, which came from Germany. And you didn't have to worry about it until the buzzing stopped. When the buzzing stopped, you didn't know where it was going to hit. You used to come over and buzz, and then everybody would duck because it would wipe a whole block out. We used to go to girls' houses for supper and eat mutton. If you ever ate mutton. Of course, they were nice and invited us. They'd want us to go in the air raid shelter when the buzz bombs come over, and we didn't. We never were in the bed for a long time, so we'd go to bed. Buzz bombs would come over, they'd all run down the air raid shelters. We slept in the subway mostly. Thousands of people in the subway. There was no problem though, because you had pea coats on, and we just cover our heads up and go to sleep. Of course, we got half loaded first. Every 4 or 5 weeks, you had to pull out of one place and go to another place, and they took you up all the rivers because the LCV could go up the rivers, and that's how they used to hide. They'd take maybe 20 LSTs and hide them on one river, another river, and then if the Germans got wind of it, they could bomb you out. So they kept moving you around all the time. We were all over England, in every port that there was. There wasn't much to do, but we just sat and wait. We never, every night, we just didn't know when it was gonna happen. We knew it was gonna be sooner or later. So one night we pulled out, and that was the beginning of the invasion. And it took us probably 3 weeks till they got the invasion going, which was going to be June 6th, 1944, 43, 44. So after they got the convoy together and got all the LSTs, and we all got together, and all you could see, which is, I think it's 28 miles from England to France. It took us 8.5 hours to get across. It was like New York City with all the ships. The sky was covered. You couldn't see none of the sky because it was covered with all bombers. And the bombers would go over and bomb, and then they'd come back, and then they'd go over. And when it came time for the invasion, it was raining, and it was cold, and it was terrible. So we landed on the beach, and on an LST, the front of it opened up, and they would go full steam ahead right onto the beach. And before they got to the beach, they dropped the anchor way out, maybe 200 yards out. That's the way they used to back it out, and to pull it out on the anchor to get them off the beach. Well, there was a lot of chaos, a lot of killing. But then, being 18 years old, they'd drop us off the ship in the LCVPs, and we'd leave and go to the troop transports, which were big, carrying thousands of men. We'd pick the men up off the transports, and then take them to the beach, drop them off. Some of them drowned, some of them got shot. When we had to go into the beach, they gave you your location to go in because there was pillboxes. And if you didn't get in right, but we did. I went to the ship to pick soldiers up, to take them in, and what do you guess? The two Mangle brothers from Pottsville got on my LCVP, and I took them in the shore. They were in the 82nd Airborne, but the Airborne couldn't go in because it was they couldn't parachute in because the weather was too bad. So we ended up taking them in. But out of all them people, these brothers get into my thing, and I take them into the beach, which is really ironic. When you took a boatload full of soldiers, and the beach patrol would tell you what big ship to go pick the other ones up. So then you'd go there, and they would give you, being that I was a bosun mate, which ran the ship, the boat, they would give you the deviation and variations of the compass, what you were taking in, whether you were taking a tank in or you were taking 36 soldiers in with rifles and pistols and what have you, because you had to have a deviation and variation for your compass. If they sent you to a certain spot on the beach, because there was pillboxes here and here, and you had to land in the middle of them or they'd knock you out of the water. So that's where you got when you went to the troop transport ships, they would tell you what your deviation, where to go. So I had a young lieutenant got on the ship, and he was very nervous. And he said, "You're going the wrong way." I said, "No, I'm not going the wrong way." He said, "Yes, you are. You're going the wrong way." So the only thing he could do, I pulled a 45 out and held it to his head and said, "I run the ship, you don't. I'm responsible." So that shut him up. I would have shot him. So then one day we used to go in about maybe 5 or 6 abreast, going to the beach with soldiers. And Germans put in, this was at the very beginning, they put in railroad ties and sharpened them like a lead pencil. And they put them into the beach. And unbeknown to us that they were in there, this one guy went in and he hit one of them railroad ties, and it went through the bow of the boat, which is metal, and it skewered, I think it was 10 soldiers. The railroad tie went right through their gut, right into the engine, and just hung that ship up. And that ship was bouncing back and forth, and then they were on this skewer, screaming their head off. So we finally got the rest of them jumped over the other side. Half of them drowned, I think, because they had 60, 70-pound packs. But there that boat was, with these guys in the middle, all skewered up on a railroad tie. When you hear 12 guys on a railroad tie, so you know none of them lived, because the railroad tie, how thick that was. So it's right through. So they just got 2 guys and put their feet up against them, backed it off, took them all the way over the top. There was a German 88 up on the mountain, and it was run on a railroad. And it used to run up and down the beach shooting 88s at the ships coming in, trying to, and they finally knocked that one out. But that's how a lot of guys get killed, with this German 88 going. We'd get tired of picking up the dead. We get tired of running the boats in. So old smart asses, we used to go in, and when you went into waves, you had to ride the waves in and land on the beach, then put it in reverse and back out. Well, if you turned sideways and a wave hit you, it flipped the boat over. So when we got tired of running things, we used to back the boat out, turn over to the waves and jump off and let it flip over. Then we'd get attached to the beach. So we'd get attached to the beach for 2 or 3 days and bum some food somewhere. And this is hard to believe. The Navy would never feed us. We didn't belong to a ship. We were vagabonds, more or less. And you'd go into a ship and ask them for something to eat. You weren't part of the crew, so you didn't get nothing. As far as eating goes, you just had to grab what you could grab, that's all. The beach didn't want to feed you because you weren't a soldier. So we learned to steal stuff. We'd go, ship was going down, we'd go up one side, steal stuff off it, while they were getting off the other side. The English sank a battleship as a breakwater so the English could go in into beaches. So we decided that we would make our home on the conning tower of the battleship. So we stole chairs, we stole everything off the other ships, took them up there, so that we made our headquarters in there. I never ate tomato juice in my life, but that's the only thing we'd steal one day. We had our whole bilges full of tomato juice. We had that and crackers. So there wasn't much food around. It all turned out that the invasion was over, the dead was all picked up. You took them to the beach, pile them up. When you first got them, you'd take a bow hook, which was a hook on a big pole. You used to pull it into the beach, pile them up. You know, after you did about 20 of them, you didn't care what it was. You just stuck the pole in them and pulled it in and put them up on the beach. When it was over, we cleaned everything up, we cleaned the beach up, cleaned the dead up. And then we got attached back onto the LSTs. And then we ran from England to Germany. We picked up all the German prisoners, put them in the LST. Most of them were all wounded. Some of them were 12, 13 years old, the Germans. Some of them were from Boston, some of them were from New York. They happened to be in Germany and going to school when the war broke out, so they had to fight for the Germans. Now, whether they were telling me a story or not, you don't know. We picked one kid up, he was 15, and could have been court-martialed. We took him up to our quarters to feed him. And he was the nastiest kid you ever saw in your life. There was a paratrooper. He was burnt real bad. And he got down into where the Germans were. And this one German, he made a wisecrack to the paratrooper, and this German was burnt pretty bad. The paratrooper took his foot and went in his head. That took care of him. It was an experience that you never forget it, you know. That's one thing that people don't understand. You want to forget. And then after that, it was all said and done, we went to Scotland and we picked up the Ile de France, which was a troop transport ship. And it brought us back from Scotland to Boston, Massachusetts. We had 5,000 people on it. We couldn't go to, there was no beds, you just laid on the decks. It only took us 6 days to get home. We got into Boston and it was 10 below zero. They took all the sea bags, put them in a dump truck, and dumped them in the Fargo building lot, and said, when you get your sea bags, you can be discharged for your month off. So, you can imagine all the sea bags. We said, the hell with it. We went out and we had a good time in Boston. The next morning we would look for our sea bags and we found them. Then we got a 30-day leave. I went home. And was never supposed to go back to sea again. But they decided that being that I had, which I didn't say, I went to Rhode Island and became a deep sea diver, which gave you 10% more in your pay when you were a deep sea diver. So they had to be one on each ship. So the USS Fall River was being commissioned. It was a brand new heavy cruiser. So they sent me to Fall River, Massachusetts. And that's where they put the crew together for this ship. We got the crew together. They brought the ship to Philadelphia to be christened. And I took my mother and father down to see the ship. My mother wouldn't even look. She didn't want to look at it because it was a massive thing, you know. And I said, you know, what's wrong with the ship? There's nothing wrong with the ship. But she, being having two sons in the service, but it was, we left there, we went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for a shakedown group. After that, we came home. I got discharged. I no longer talked about what I just talked about because it was over.